IT who's with us.
You're live.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Anthony.
Is that who it is? Hi, thanks, Anthony.
It
This
is.
is the Common Council Ordinance Committee regular meeting. Today is July 19th. It is 7:03 and we're commencing the meeting now. And I'll just call out the roll up. Just I see people are here. David Holman is here. Dominique Johnson is here. Josh Goldstein is here. Brian Meeks is here. Tom Livingston's here, and Nora Najelski-Eitner. And I don't believe that we have any other council people who joined us this evening. So it's just us guys. The first thing that we have this evening is a public hearing, discuss and vote on Chapter 17, Aquifer Protection Agency, Section 1, Designation Membership Technical Training. And Brian will tell us that we did a proper legal notice for a public hearing for this section. So if there's anybody here from the public that would like to speak on this, if they could raise their hands so that Anthony can let you speak. Seeing no hands raised, then I would entertain a motion to, well, first of all, I'll close public hearing. And is there any discussion among the committee members about this piece of legislation? Brian, for your benefit, we're just basically changing the name of the Planning and Zoning Commission for purposes of this section, now that we've changed the name of the Planning and Zoning Commission. So having no discussion, I would entertain a motion to send this to Common Council. Mr. Livingston's made the motion that we send Chapter 17, Section 1 to public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Great, thanks.
Lisa, I think you said you wanted to send it to Common Council, not that you want a public hearing. This is the public.
No, I
hearing.
want to send it to Common Council for a vote at Common Council. Did I say public hearing again?
Yes.
Thank you for correcting me. We're sending it to Common Council for vote. Great. And that is unanimous if I've counted the hands correctly. Great. Now we are in the public comment section. So if anybody's here to make public comment this evening, if they could be recognized by raising their hands. There is one hand raised, Anthony.
And you have the floor.
Hi. Good evening, everyone. This is Margaret Watt. I'm just joining in from another meeting, so I'm aware that you're going to be talking about the proposed amended ordinance on cannabis tonight, and I did listen in last month. I'm interested to see where things have landed this month prior to an upcoming public hearing. I just wanted to comment because as co-chair of the Norwalk Partnership, which is the Substance Misuse Prevention Coalition focused on underage substance use, I've just been attending a number of trainings on marijuana, national conferences that have just happened the last week, and there's just constantly new emerging data about issues that are coming out in places that do legalize marijuana for sale within their city limits. And we have states like Colorado and so forth trying to dial back things that they have put in place. So last month, I know there was discussion about the possibility of designating as the public consumption space the entire city of Norwalk, and then just exempting the areas that were specifically excluded in the law. And I just think that that would be such a dangerous step to take, because we really are going into a new market with something that is addictive and poses significant health risks to certain people, you know, pregnant women, kids, et cetera. And we know already from law enforcement that people have been using cannabis throughout the city, and it's just going to make it that much harder to manage. And if we find that that poses huge problems, dialing it back is going to be so much harder. So I just really want to encourage in any discussion about the designated location that we do start with something small and manageable. I know Mr. Goldstein has attended some of our cannabis committee meetings, and there's been discussion about the fact that it might make a lot of sense to have those sites be monitored, have people with Narcan on hand because of the contamination of the product that's out there in the stream. So that was my main comment. And then I know you'll also probably be touching again on the ordinance proposal to have the city community services manage the marijuana funds that'll come as part of the municipal 3% tax, which I think does make sense. And I know you're all aware that there are 6 allowed areas of funding in the cannabis law at the state level. None of those specifically mentions prevention, none of those 6. They don't exclude it under sort of the community services area. But we've also been really looking and talking to various partners at, you know, who's doing what and where are the gaps. And prevention, you know, I have a drug-free communities grant for the city of Norwalk that will expire in another year. Hopefully we'll get another 5 years of funding and then it'll be gone. So I want to draw your attention to the fact that if there's any way to potentially add the importance of community services using some of the municipal funding to fund things like the awareness campaigns that the state is not providing about the health issues, warning labels, signage, things like that. There's no funding for any of that. And the municipal revenue could go to that, but it also might never go to that if it's not listed anywhere. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Are there any other speakers? So I will now close the public hearing, the public comment section, and we'll turn our attention to the acceptance of minutes. Do I have a motion to accept the minutes as they're filed? Mr. Hooverman has made the motion. Does anybody have any comments or suggestions? Mr. Livingston?
Yes, thank you. Just on page, let's see, it's page 5. It's under new business. We cut 2 things. In the second paragraph of that starts, Mr. Livingston explained. The second sentence should read, Mr. Livingston said that he did not hear from any other commission and that this is just a technical change. No, that's just wrong. And then in the actual resolution, it should say move to approve the change to chapter 17, section 1 and refer to public hearing. Or send it, I don't know what the language is, Brian, whether it's refer or send to public hearing.
Thank you. Dominique, you've got some, is that all you have, Tom? Or
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
Dominique, you have some other changes you'd like to make?
Yes, it's more of a, just bouncing this off of you on, under public hearing discussion on page 3, it does say something about, you know, Ms. Johnson said she appreciated the adoption of inclusive gender neutral language in the ordinance. She noted that it is important to do this. So I just want to be clear, I'm not talking about gender neutral language being something homeowners do. It's more pesticide-free lawns. But as long as you think that comes through, okay. Though it's great if people also want to use gender neutral language. That's not what I was talking about right there. So, yeah. Is that clear, or should we make a change there? What does the jury think?
It's a little messy. What?
Okay.
I actually had the same reading as you did, Dominique, so probably fix it.
Thank you. Okay, so it wasn't just me. I appreciate it. So then maybe the third sentence of that paragraph could read, she noted that it is important for the city to, what I meant,
Ordinance?
yeah.
Dominique, where are we?
Sorry, page, thanks, Brian, page 2, the paragraph that starts, Mr. Livingston offered grammatical changes.
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
So in the third sentence of that paragraph, it should read, how did you phrase it, Chair? You said
Important that it is important that the city adopt this ordinance.
ordinance. Because they can't expect homeowners to do it if the city is not doing it.
Yeah, so then I would say because they can't expect homeowners to restrict their pesticide use if the city is not doing it.
That's, that was my intention. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Brian.
Yep.
Any other changes? So I'd like to, so Mr. Hooverman's motion's on the floor to adopt the minutes as amended. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Aye.
That's 5. And then I believe Mr. Meek and I will probably abstain.
Thanks.
I left the meeting early, so I'm going to abstain as well. So the minutes have been moved on, and now old business, discuss and vote on the cannabis ordinance. And Josh, I'm going to turn this over to you because you've got the pen on this. So if you'd like to talk about some of the changes that have been made since our last meeting.
Sure. I'm going to keep this brief because frankly, it is. The changes, I'll start from the beginning. The definitions, the changes really in formats, not in substance. These definitions are again from the state statute as they've been from the inception of the draft of this ordinance. The only thing that you'll notice is that definitions that aren't either explicit of terms that are not explicitly mentioned or referred to in the ordinance have been omitted. I'm going to move on to section 1-4. So that's like 3 pages in. You'll see on A, this is new, where it says there shall be no more than 3 retailers in the city. This is due to what we discussed at last meeting, which is that the state has changed. Originally there was a requirement to have 1 retail site for every 25,000 residents. The state eliminated that requirement. We are putting it in our ordinance because we think that that's the right number at this moment of retailers. That does not include, that excludes dispensary, as it says in the definition of retailer, a dispensary facility and like micro cultivators. Again, that limits the number of retail establishments to 3. In 1.5C, I want to note a couple things. One, there was I've talked with several of you about this individually, but the word consumption, there is not an applicable definition for the word consumption in the state statute, not that I could find, nor could I find actually one in our city code, which means that you sort of defer to the general legal principle that the general definition of the term is what prevails. And the way it's written, I think it makes it pretty clear that consumption in any form is what consumption means. So I think that should be pretty clear. And after talking about it with council and a number of you guys on the committee, I did not think that it needed to be explicitly defined or we had to make up a explicit definition, considering all the other definitions are from the state statute. Another thing I want to note is you'll see there's a sentence that starts, the designated place or places shall contain visible signage. I want to include after visible the word multilingual. This was something that Dominique had brought up in the prior meeting. It didn't make it into the draft, but it should have. So I'm going to want to make that amendment tonight.
Where is that again, Josh?
So that's 1.5C, where it says in the second sentence where it says the designated place or places shall contain visible signage.
Yeah.
The word multilingual needs to be in there. I think visible multilingual signage, however you want to phrase it.
So Josh, Josh, sorry, I don't disagree at all. I mean, do you think there's going to be any question about what languages? I think Diana said today that there's something like 68 languages spoken in the city now.
It's a good point. I mean, I think obviously the primary 2 would be English and Spanish. I'd entertain what people think of whether we need to include 68 languages. I probably don't think we should.
No, I'm fine. I'm fine with that. Just raise the question. I mean,
it's a good question. I just think there needs to be some indication in the ordinance that it can't just be in English.
Okay.
If you guys want to talk about whichever way you want to do it, that's fine. But I feel strongly about it. I know others on the committee do too.
I think we should leave it just multilingual because however our population changes, if we have a sudden surge of Haitian, we might change over time about what languages we think are important. So rather than dictating it now, it should be.
That's fine.
Multilingual.
Just raising the question.
No, it's a good, it's a good point. I actually see Margaret put a comment about in her committee, they propose bilingual graphics. I mean, again, like that's where we want to be. I mean, there's a significant Black and Hispanic population in the city. Obviously there are people who speak multiple languages. I think that regardless, multilingual needs to be there.
Agree.
I want to move on to 1-9. So flip your hymnals a couple pages. 1-9, I would note, and I think this was in the prior draft, but just that the guidelines that Lamond and his team are working on, again, there is some council oversight that it would need to be approved from time to time, no less frequently than once every 2 years. And then in B, this was a section that was rewritten, namely that pursuant to the guidelines, there will be a periodic or at least annual solicitation of applications for people who want to, who are interested in acquiring funds from the Norwalk Cannabis account, obviously provided that their applications are conform with the guidelines. And this is what's different from last time, that the Chief of Community Service will forward a summary of the applications to the Community Services Committee, in which they will get the discretion to either approve or deny in whole the package. So there is no line item veto here. It's either all or nothing. And that was, that's a good government, making sure that we provide as streamlined and nonpartisan a review process as possible.
I have a question on that, Josh. Is it clear that it's a summary of the approved applications, the applications that have gotten through whatever vetting process that Community Services has?
So it says, provided the applications received in connection with such solicitation conform with the guidelines in this chapter, the Chief of Community Services shall forward a summary of such applications. So that answers your question. Because if the application,
a summary of all applications, or a summary of the applications that have been chosen to receive the money?
If you keep reading, it says, along with the recommendation for final action.
Well, I think
Yes.
David's question, it's a summary of the applications that can conform to the guidelines. Whether-
yes,
So that's the summary of all applications, and then also with the recommendation for final action.
Right.
yes.
So I'm confused as to why the committee needs to vote on all applications. It's only got to vote on the application that is for final action.
The idea, David, is that say there are, well, I'm making this up. Say there are 5 applications that conform, and the Chief of Community Services submits a summary of 5 applications and recommends that they all be approved. The idea is that the council has the discretion to either approve all 5 of those projects or deny all 5 of those projects. But in order for them to get sent to the council in the first place, as it says in the ordinance, it has to conform with the guidelines, which means that it would be something that would be approved.
Wait, let me see if I understand what David's question is. So we get 20 applications.
Yeah.
We get a recommendation that we're going to accept 5 of them. But they're going to send a summary of all 20 with the recommendation that we do these 5. And then the only thing we vote on are the 5. Up or down.
Yes, what Lisa said is correct.
That's where I'm confused, because if you have 20 applications that all conform, but you've only chosen 5, they conform to the process, but they didn't, for whatever reason, weren't vetted or weren't passed on.
They were probably vetted.
And you're not sure what the conforming is, so I guess it has to do with what the guidelines say. I just want to be clear that.
I don't think that everything that, doesn't he have the discretion to pick and choose among those applications, those 20 conforming applications, because he thinks.
He does, but the language says that he'll forward a summary of all of the conforming applications, like David said. If you want to change it to have a summary of the recommended applications, we can change the language. But right now, it's all conforming applications, which has, for example, could be 20, and he selected 5 of them.
Yeah, but do people on council want to know everything that came in? Is that
was the theory.
Yeah. That we got to see everything that came in, but the expert is saying that we should do 5. I'm trying to understand, David, do you want the transparency?
Well, I'm not understanding. If we have a staff who has an expertise, who has made determinations, why do we need to see everything else if the determinations have been made? Well, I don't know what the guideline process is yet. Until I see what that guideline process is, then I understand how the applications are vetted, whether there's a panel that like we do an RFP process, there's a panel that sits down and fills out forms, and we go through it that way, and a determination is made as who gets the job. So it's similar to that, what does the committee or the council do at that point? If they just see there were 20 applications, these are the 5 that you need to vote on. I feel like that I'm not sure why we need to see the applications that don't.
Well, we're
aren't
only
being-
getting a summary of those applications. And I guess I feel like for transparency purposes, I kind of like to know who were the winners and who were the losers, just to have a sense of what are the types of organizations for a government transparency. And it's
Got it.
mostly going to go through community services. So I guess it would be vetted there probably, likely.
But then it's two
It would
different
be.
things. It's a summary of all the applications, and then it's the ones that are
recommendation.
recommended and being voted on. So
Yes.
that's 2 different things.
Yes, that's that's how I read it. I think that's what the process we want, right? We want a summary of everything that's applied for, everybody who's applied and met the guidelines. And then we want community services recommendation for,
The
I guess
fo-
for me, it was confusing because it's all in one there. That's all. It just didn't seem like 2 separate things. It seemed like one continuum at that point. That's how it felt to me when I read it. But if it's not, I'm cool.
I read it as 2 when I know that this language was drafted. I read it as 2. But
read it
David,
as,
if you.
how does that people on the committee feel? I mean, I feel like,
Well, Dominique, I think, has some comment
oh,
because.
sorry,
you had a hand
Dominica.
up.
Yeah, you're muted though.
No, it's all good. I was waiting for the cue, but I don't know if this is, Tom, I appreciate you. I'll take it. Yeah, as I'm thinking through this, I mean, to me, it feels like how I read it was that the Community Services Committee was going to be the venue where the Chief of Community Services will give his or her their recommendation for final action, right? And then it gets voted on up or down by them, and then that decision gets voted on up or down by the council. But I don't know, because I feel like having all the information makes me feel like that will leave open at least 2 venues for people to come and say, well, why weren't we funded? Change your decision. Do you know what I mean?
If I can comment a little bit, summary is just that. I mean, it could
Okay.
be a memo that said we have 25 conforming applications. Here are the 5 we recommended. If we're worried that somehow giving people more information is going to change their decision making, that's sort of a different issue that I'm not sure we can really address in an ordinance per se, other than
Right.
withholding information. And I don't really want to do that.
Well, I think the information, to your point, Tom, is not a bad thing. It's just the idea that then, are the rules clear, right? We're just voting up or down, or
Yep.
because we're given extra information, are people going to infer that then they can say, well, actually, I like these 5 groups, not these 5 groups.
Well, but
That's why we said it had to be in
That's-
whole to, you
Right.
can
Yeah,
have. yes,
not in part at all. So
The-
if you
the
disagree
whole
with
point of
even
this-
one, you vote no hypothetically, and that's
Right.
your vote. Okay.
You can choose to do that, but the function of the vote is that it's not a line item veto. You're either voting for all of them or you're voting for none of them. So if there's a council person who says, I wish this group got funded, therefore I'm voting no, that person's going to vote no anyway.
Okay. And how do we
Let
feel
them.
about, oh, sorry, go ahead, Josh.
No, go for it.
All right, then how do we feel about the fact that certain groups are going to have kind of in a public forum, the fact that they were not awarded? Because I believe it has to be public, right? Because it's part of our packets. How do we feel about that?
So aren't they going to come and complain anyway if they weren't selected? I mean, they knew that they applied and they knew that they didn't get it. And so they may still, if they're unhappy, they will likely show up.
And
And in the
hopefully
C-
by, oh, sorry.
So
go
the
for it, Tom.
CDBG people, it's all listed in what's public, who got what.
And also I would note that the hope is that for groups that maybe didn't get it, this year, maybe they're able to put forward a different application in a future year where it does conform with the guidelines, and maybe it makes it through review. It's not, this isn't gamesmanship. I mean, the whole point of this is that it's a review by experts. And so if you can do what you need to do to survive the acceptable and equal scrutiny, then why wouldn't, you know what I mean? Like the whole point of this is to make this fair and equal, but also give the council, make sure that the council is not just picking and cherry picking.
I see that, and I think that's a good thing. I'm all for us as council members having more information. Is there, just to put it out there, is a way that we can get that information as elected representatives of our neighbors? And it doesn't necessarily mean that all these nonprofits are being publicly kind of revealed as not receiving funds. Like, is there a way we can get that information in caucus or in executive session? Or I'm not playing devil's
Brian,
advocate.
this
I'm
feels
just
like
throwing
an
out
FOI
ideas.
question.
The what?
This feels like a freedom of information question because
It could be, obviously. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
but-
I'm not opposed if someone wants to FOIA, obviously, that's a right, but I'm just saying, just coming from a perspective of a nonprofit, we should just be clear then, hey, you're going to possibly, if you don't receive this, it's going to be known that you didn't receive it, right? I mean, that's just, to me, thinking from the perspective of the nonprofit community, something to be clear about, perhaps, if
But
we're
there's
still
plenty
going.
of, I mean, people apply for grants all the time that they don't get. I don't think there's any shaming. I hope that people don't feel like
not
this
at all.
shaming process. It's just-
Again, I'm gonna go back to the word summary. I mean, summary doesn't even require names. But
You could-
I'm not that, I mean, people might do it, but I agree with everybody else. People, when you submit a grant for public funds, you gotta expect to be public.
I think so.
Okay, well then if we are not putting organization names, then that I think alleviates my general concern about the fact. If it's summaries, to your point, Tom, fine. Like,
I mean, I don't, listen,
But Dominic, I
I'm
think we should
speaking,
be prepared that it's going to be names because first of all, it's FOIA. And secondly, government transparency. And third, I don't think that there's any shame in not getting a grant you apply for. I think that that's just, that's business in that world. Mr. Hoovelman, you got your hand up and then we'll go back to Dominique to see what her thoughts are.
Just a question. So city departments and city agencies are treated the same way then? They apply for this in the exact same way?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So Dominique,
I don't have any more issues. I just wanted to have an open conversation about this,
No, I appreciate it.
given that this language has drastically changed, right?
Yeah.
From version to version. And as a community services chair, I just felt it was my role to do a little bit of.
No, I'm glad you did.
That's all. Yeah.
no, well, you're the person who's going to have to sit through this. So, and you've gone through some similar things. So we just want to make sure that it feels like something that you can manage.
Sounds good.
I don't know how we can get around the transparency part, though. I think that's really important for the whole city. And
Absolutely. I don't disagree with that whatsoever. I think it's absolutely crucial to have transparency in our government and what this money goes to. Sure. Yeah.
I also want to bring back one other thing, just because Margaret brought it up. The prevailing sentiment, and I know a lot of us have talked about this, and one thing we've actually been working on is putting together a list of sites across the city that would be, when we consider eligible, which means it conforms with our maps so that it's not near schools, churches, and places where health services are rendered. I'm doing a pretty crude summary of this, but we've got a list of a number of sites. I think it's over 20 potential sites that would be feasible. And the other thing is that we are seriously considering, and I think something that the mayor, and I know it's been discussed about.
Josh, can I interrupt for a second? Just to clarify, you're talking about the location of retail establishments, not smoking places, right?
No, I'm talking about smoking places.
Oh, okay, all right.
No.
I'm glad I asked then.
No, so let me make this extra clear. So one of the things that the zoning, the amendment, the future forthcoming amendment to the zoning regulations would deal with are the maps and the eligible sites. This is something that was brought up at the initial hearing. This isn't going away. You're going to see this in the future of the maps of where eligible retail sites would be, given the conditions that are imposed, those that exist for alcohol, as well as these healthcare, health services-based sites. The idea of the designated spot is not to designate the whole city. It's to designate places and within the mayor's discretion, but place or places where people could publicly consume cannabis in a way that, and obviously with the multilingual signage. But I just wanted to bring that up because Margaret brought it up, and I just want to be extra clear about this. With that, that's pretty much all the changes that have happened since last episode. So, I think that was a good.
Josh, just to
Yep.
clarify for people watching, if we don't designate a space, what happens?
So that's a mixed bag. But long and short of it is we are required by the law, by the state law, if we are going to allow the retail sale of cannabis, which is what this ordinance does, we are required under the state law to designate a spot. I mean, I think there's a potential for an enforcement issue from the state, possibly maybe even a legal challenge. But long and short of it is, and I know that we've talked about this as other cities are grappling with what to do and trying to figure it out. And frankly, we saw it was reported in the press recently that Milford has actually gone ahead and designated a portion of a street. I think the approach we're taking is a little different from what Milford's doing. It affords us more flexibility and deals with a lot of logistical issues that probably will come up. For example, if you live on one side of the city, what happens if a designated spot is on the other side of the city, which is why we put place or places. I know, David, this is something you've brought up and eloquently argued for, and I think you're right. Tom, I don't know if that quite answered your question.
I guess if we don't designate a spot, then people can smoke anywhere. Is that correct?
I think that
That's my understanding. If we don't
it's
designate a spot.
absent the places that are explicitly prohibited. Obviously, like as the ordinance, it does say explicitly in the ordinance in 15A that the consumption of cannabis shall not occur in any form on land owned or controlled by the city, including but not limited to sidewalks, parks, beaches, and municipal owned lands or buildings. Absent that, people would be able to smoke wherever. The designated site has less to do with the all or nothing. The designated site means that you will not be ticketed and given a violation if you publicly consume cannabis in this designated spot. That's what that means.
Mr. Huberman has a question, but I just also want to mention that the outdoor dining guidelines and regulations will also say that there won't be, it won't be permitted in outdoor dining establishments.
Well, I guess I'm sorry. I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. So if for example, we did under the state statute, if we don't designate a location or locations, then people can smoke anywhere. That's my understanding.
I think that's a reasonable interpretation. I will note that the state statute in this part is vague. I'm not gonna, hold back on that. But one thing we've done explicitly in the ordinance, and Tom, this is the only reason I'm pushing back on this, is that we've explicitly said in the ordinance that the consumption of cannabis is not permitted in these specific spots.
Mhm.
And of course, that's a pretty wide swath of land in the city. Again, sidewalks, parks, beaches, and municipal owned land and buildings.
Josh, can I jump in for a second?
Yes, please.
Sure. So section 1-5 talks about cannabis consumption restrictions. Tom, I'm in agreement with you that if we did not have section 1-5 and we proceeded with allowing the retail sale of cannabis in the city of Norwalk and 1-5 didn't exist, then it would be my interpretation that people could smoke anywhere on publicly owned lands. However, as people can see when they review this draft ordinance in 1-5, as Josh was explaining, we're setting forth restrictions such as you cannot smoke at outdoor dining facilities, and that will also be in the guidelines, as Lisa just noted, and you cannot smoke on land owned or controlled by the city, and then it lists sidewalks, parks, beaches, municipally owned land or buildings. There's another step to this, and that's what we've been talking about, that because we're allowing because we might be allowing, if this committee and the Common Council approves it, if we're allowing the retail sale, then we must designate a space, a public space, that isn't privately owned, pursuant to state statute. This is not something that the municipality can get out of right now because the state is mandating it. So the discussion now has to be, where, if this goes forward, where is that space? Because we've told people in the ordinance where they cannot do it, whether it be outdoor dining or on publicly owned land or controlled by the city. But now we have to designate a space. Doesn't say the size, the state statute doesn't talk about the size of the space. It doesn't talk about the hours that you have to permit it. It's very vague in that regard, as Josh has said, but that's where we are right now. If we just proceeded forward with this right now, we would not be allowing cannabis to be smoked on all city-owned or controlled land because we have 1-5, but the state is mandating that we select a spot. So that's why we have to take this extra step.
Yeah, Brian is absolutely right. And look, I mean, this is something we are required to do. And that's the way the state has conditioned it. And so we have to follow the law. Dominique?
Well, wait, I think David was first. David had his hand.
Oh, my apologies.
Yep, and then Dominique.
I just saw Dominique's hand up.
Yeah,
on the
Dominique had her
Zoom.
hand up, but I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
David was.
Sorry,
didn't
David.
go, sorry, forgive me, I didn't go electronic. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, also in the Public Act, it's not, this outdoor space, this designated space, there's no language that makes it conform the way the retail establishment has to conform to distances from churches, all of that. There isn't anything
No, there isn't.
in there. So
You are correct, David. All it says in the statute is that if you decide to allow the retail sale,
you have to
you must select a space. It could be, you could say but maybe some people, what some municipalities might say, it's the whole, if any land controlled by the city or owned, you can do it there. Other people might limit it to the size of, 5 feet by 5 feet. I mean, it doesn't say the hours and it doesn't say the distance you must provide. It just says you must provide.
Right, but
Again,
what I'm saying
and-
is also, it's not conforming to the same rules that the retail establishment. So there's I've heard some people say that there's certain public land that could be chosen that's too close to, it's too close to the,
Sensitive areas.
sensitive
Yeah,
areas.
so I want to note,
And that's not true with the designated space is all I'm trying to bring up. That's all.
Well,
So
we will tell
let
you,
me- I wanna-
she'll talk about that, right? About how the mayor's considered that.
Yeah, so I want to talk about, one is the law and one is what we are going to do. Okay. The law, David, you are correct. There are not the same impositions in the law when it comes to the designated spot as there are for things like not near church, stuff like that, which we're going to do anyway through our zoning amendment. However, and I would also note, David, that different cities are reportedly approaching this differently. It was reported in the press again that Milford chose about a piece of sidewalk. However, New Haven, for example, has basically said, we're going to do what we do with cigarettes. And Bridgeport, I think, has done largely the same thing, where they've basically taken that approach of, we're just explicitly prohibiting it at places, but not explicit, doing what basically we're proposing to do. We are proposing a different track here, similar to what Milford's doing, but I would say distinguishable from it.
But I go
Then
back
there's the part about what we
to
want to
something I
do.
said though in the last meeting, and that is, are we looking at multiple locations because of the equity piece of this?
Yes,
that
is the
we're
answer to your question.
excluding.
And
So
that's exactly what
that's
I,
the big part for me is that
the
we're
answer to your question is
looking at
yes.
equity. Okay.
So
think
I brought this up earlier. It's why I referred to you specifically. Again, the way we wrote the ordinance where we said place or places is to give us the flexibility to do just that. And in my example earlier about what if someone lived in, West Norwalk and the designated spot was in East Norwalk,
Okay.
right? The whole point is to give us flexibility, and obviously the mayor, it's going to be within his discretion. But as we discussed last time, this is to deal with those very types of concerns, the logistical type, especially considering that the designated spot is an equity measure that was put in the state statute And again, we have to follow it in accordance with the law, but we're also trying to go a little extra than that and make sure that it's not near a sensitive site, that it's not near a school. And with the help of our planning and zoning department, we've gone, and our health department, we've actually gone through the maps and isolated spots that fit those parameters. They run the gamut across the city, but we have begun doing that analysis.
Right. And with all of the filters that we talked about before, like with schools and whatever.
Filters is a good word. Yes.
It really concerned about that. So, Dominique, you have your hand up.
Just quickly, Lisa, I'm assuming we're going to be discussing this at the next meeting in September in some way, shape, or form. It might be
Public hearing, yes.
it might be helpful because if it is a public hearing or whatever it might be helpful that we put back the map showing where these things can be.
That
and
was
any information that we can provide to the public about where this could be, I think might be helpful for the next meeting. And
I have
Dominique, please go ahead.
already-
Sorry to interrupt.
I had already actually
Okay.
notified the planning and zoning department and the health department a while ago that when it came time for this to come to public hearing, that we provide that kind of information for that exact reason.
Excellent idea. We'll do it. Dominique, you're next.
There we go. On mute. Great. So just to pick up, of course, when we're talking about consumption, my hand's up because I know I mentioned that last time, but I understand absolutely why there's no definition given where we're at with the statute. I guess it hinges a little bit on what David said. So this idea of, I'm all for having a conversation either now or at the public hearing about the fact that we know that this is not going to be an exact science and there'll be an art to this, I think in some ways, right? And that we want to be clear as folks creating this law that we're open to, I don't know if it's necessarily calling audibles, but it's open to bringing it back to ordinance if we need to, because we just don't know kind of how this is going to work in practice. I don't know if tonight's the night where we have that conversation, or maybe that's better suited for September. But I think that's my concern, right? And I've said what I said last time quite clearly, and I know I talked with you, Josh, about it in advance of this meeting, but I just think it may be really worthwhile to have a public conversation so the public knows that we're thinking about this and we're aware of this, and that there are going to be ways that this manifests in practice that we're not potentially, anticipating. And based on people's experiences, maybe that we're amenable to bringing it back to the floor here is kind of my thought, right?
Yeah, and that was one of the reasons,
Absolutely.
not to speak on Josh's behalf, but that's one of the reasons why we ultimately thought that the redesignation or the designation would be at the mayor's discretion. We were going to try to pick one place and put it in the ordinance, and we thought that's way too inflexible. What if we don't like it? What if it
Right.
doesn't work? What if we need 5 places, one in each of our districts? There was so many manifestations of this whole idea.
That's
We
right.
spoke with so many different departments. So we thought really this is something that maybe we ought to put in the mayor's discretion. We'll try it. If this spot doesn't work for a variety of reasons that we can't anticipate now, we can change it. So we did try to build in some flexibility in some of the choices we made in the ordinance. And this is
There is flexibility. And anytime an ordinance needs to be fixed because there's an issue, whether it's because of drafting or whatever it might be, please bring it back. But the other thing is that I just lost what I was going to say. I'll think about what I was going to say and I'll come back.
return to us.
It's all
Take
good.
your next if Dominique is done. Unless another
I do
comment.
have a follow-up if that's okay. Oh,
Absolutely.
and thank you. And it's directly related to this. So then by adding in or by action of the common council, that then allows the council to then say, this isn't working, Mayor. I mean, I'm going off the,
I thought it was our intention to delete that section. or
okay, I'm
by-
looking off the agenda available from the.
Yeah, no, it
city
was,
website.
but we intended to delete that because we thought,
Okay, so that's been deleted. Okay.
so we
Yeah,
should,
we actually,
yeah, for some
Alright.
reason, I don't know why it still shows there. We intended to delete those words.
Yeah, I'll look in my inbox, but I'm looking off the one.
no, you're
Website.
correct.
No, you're correct. It's on both.
That was,
We intended to delete that.
Okay, good. Oh, good. I wanted to raise that then, and I appreciate that
That could be a block too. And we can always whine as common council member about something we don't like that the mayor did.
Lisa,
Or
I
by
forgot, I remember what I was gonna say now.
Yeah.
On top of this, the ordinance that everyone sees in front of them is simply, if this is what the council decides to do, this ordinance is the skeleton to allow the retail establishment and sale and set some very limited parameters. The meat and bones of this is most likely going to be with the zoning regulations, specifically where these things can be, hours of operation, signage, things of that nature. This is merely the vehicle to allow this to happen. If the common council chooses to do so, so that it would allow the sale, and then the municipality would be able to get these funds. And then it specifically enumerates what we can use the money for. And we're limited based on what the state statute says. And so we've specifically enumerated what we can use it for, and we've enumerated all of the things that the state allows us for. But again, this is a limited document because it's a skeleton and it just allows the process to go forward. But again, if something needs to be changed, we should bring it back.
Yeah,
Brian's
thank-
absolutely right. And the one thing,
Yeah.
Brian's absolutely right. The one other thing I would add is that it's actually a skeleton for two things. One is everything Brian said. Two, it's the guidelines for how the cannabis account will be regulated and managed. So two things, not one.
Two things, right? And that's the important part, because we always talk about this as a mechanism for collecting the funds and dispersing the funds. So that's, we've been making that point the whole time. We're not the only people involved in this game in the city. David, you're next.
Yeah, I'm confused about the map. And that is this map what we're locking the mayor into? That we're gonna look at? And that's where he has to choose from? Is that
Yeah.
what the map that we're talking about? I mean, I know the map that we're talking about because I've seen that
Yeah.
map in the other presentations, but that map was specifically about where the retail establishments would go. Are we, I'm concerned about whether if the mayor is going to make an announcement by September of I've chosen these places, then that's one conversation, but I don't know that he'll have made that determination by that point. And so I'm curious, we just have to be clear about why we're looking at the map at the public hearing. That's all, because I hate to pigeonhole us. I hate to pigeonhole the mayor. Also, what happens if a place is chosen and someone opens a sensitive establishment nearby, and now we have to move it, or we have to figure, so all of this without having the zoning regulations in place and everything else becomes a tough conversation when we go back to, here's the map, here's where it's going to be, or
Right.
here's the
And
house.
I just want to know,
Discussion.
That's all.
We wanted the mayor to have discussion so that when these things shift and shade on us, we can shift and shade. too.
Right, but
May
I'm concerned about the map right now and locking
one
something.
additional, I just want to note one additional, I'm sorry. One thing, David, I just want to note also that the effective date of this ordinance is the date that the zoning regulations are effective to. So it's not that we'll be ahead of zoning, planning and zoning. I want to make it very clear that while we're doing the ordinance first, they will actually both be effective simultaneously.
Right, but zoning
may-
is not picking this location. The mayor.
Zoning is not picking this location.
So
The mayor is picking this location. The mayor can technically pick wherever he wants under the state statute. The map is guidance.
Right, that's,
The map is guidance, and we are and a way that we are demonstrating and trying to be as thoughtful as we can in determining where the designated spot or spots will be. That's it.
and that was the point I was about to say. I think that the map is not going to be something that we're going to guide him through in the ordinance. That's just a guidance or, a reference point, I think,
Yep.
that he's using. And I think there's a lot of sensitivity to not being close to these sensitive establishments, as you call them, which is
Yeah,
good.
also right. The people
If-
don't
if
want
it's
them to be
map-
close to
If it's
school.
the same map we've been looking at, that map is quite confusing, and I'm concerned that we start confusing the people listening right now about how this is going to go without having the mayor here to speak about his thoughts about it and those types of things. That's all. I'm just as much confusion as we can pull out of this as we roll something like this out is going to be, I think, to our benefit. And that's all. That's why I bring it up.
No, I appreciate it.
Nora, you're next.
Thank you. I have a couple of thoughts that I did want to raise. I mean, one of them, just to piggyback a touch on this point with David, not to add yet more confusion, but I do think that it is important that we not be talking in the ordinance committee about things that are not in the ordinance, right? So we have given the mayor discretion. Josh has, because of his experience and involvement in this, is aware of the fact that there is a map being bandied about that would, involve these places, but it is not, there's nothing in the ordinance that requires the mayor to use either the retail map or the map of public property, which would potentially be used for designated places, right? So I do think that that is an important thing just to be clear on. But the work that the mayor is planning on doing to designate these places is really at the mayor's discretion as far as this ordinance is concerned. So maybe that's part of the confusion here. And it is, I think, potentially worth considering then whether if there is any public presentation of these maps, that they be made by the people who actually have authority over them and whose relevant regulations or decisions are going to be involved. Because, and I mean, it's a fair question as to whether some of these criteria that we're talking about for the maps should be in the ordinance, right? Should the ordinance specify it is at the mayor's discretion? However, such sites should not be located within, X distance of a hospital of a sensitive site. I'm not sure. It's raising that as one possibility to consider. If there is some reason that we feel like there should be guardrails put on the mayor's discretion, that would be the appropriate way to do it. I do agree that in general, given the possibility for changes over time, a site that was good now isn't working, it just seems silly to designate sites. But if, that's one way to handle it. Second issue, slightly related, as we've all said, part of the issue with needing these designated sites is an equity issue. The whole goal of decriminalizing cannabis, or at least from my perspective, the whole goal of decriminalizing cannabis was to reduce the number of people who are moved into the criminal justice system on the basis of cannabis usage. It's a waste of everybody's resources. It has been a totally failed policy. It has led to, total over incarceration, and has particularly impacted, as we all know, low income and, Black and brown communities. So I have some concern with the violation piece. A $50 violation is in the eye of the beholder, right? For some people, $50 violation is not large. For some people, $50 violation is massive. And we have all, I'm sure, read accounts of what has happened, not necessarily with cannabis violations, but with violations in general, where someone who's low income gets a violation, they can't pay the ticket, so they get, it mounts. The interest begins to mount, they get a second violation. All of a sudden, they've accumulated enough debts to the city in the form of these violations that now they're on the hook for some more substantial criminal action on the failure to pay violations. So I do think that it is, as an underlying measure, really important that there be outdoor spaces for people, particularly for people who live in apartments, to be able to safely use cannabis in a way that does not intrude upon their neighbors. But I also spoke to Josh about wanting to make sure that we have some ability as a council to review the impact of the violations that are being issued going forward. So I had suggested that we potentially add language, and I think this came up at the last ordinance meeting as well, potentially add language requesting that a report be made annually to the council regarding the demographics of people who receive these violations, and what, if any, impact we're sort of seeing on them from an equity lens. So that would be one amendment that I would consider proposing, that we consider today before moving this to public hearing, just as an opportunity to have a quick check and make sure that the ordinance is working as intended. We do want to discourage people from smoking in places that they are not supposed to be smoking. We need an enforcement mechanism for that. But to this larger conversation about the designated places, we also need some way of having feedback for us if the designated places are turning out to be insufficient in some way, or we're seeing a surge in violations issued in a particular area of the city. That's important information that could feed back into the question of whether we have sufficient designated places, whether they're the right designated places, whether the ordinance is accomplishing its objective of keeping people respectful of their neighbors, but also not criminalizing behavior that is not overly criminalizing behavior in excess of its potential detrimental effects. So those are my 2 cents.
I think she's saying Brian.
I did, I said Brian, sorry. I have my own mute on.
Hi, thanks, everyone. Look, it's clear to me that staff's put a lot of time and thought into this, and so have all of you. And, you know, there's a lot of work here and probably a lot more coming down the road. I just want to let you know where I stand up front is that I can't move this forward in any form or fashion. I would rather let other cities make mistakes and have successes and learn from those. Couple things, you know, I've seen San Francisco and Seattle firsthand, having traveled there quite a bit, and it's a dramatic change after, you know, and everybody had these same conversations going into it. I've heard even worse about Denver, although I haven't been there in a while. But moreover, the issue I have is just from public safety in general, and we've had a massive shortage in safety officers in the city, and I feel like our ability to recruit and retain talent will be greatly diminished by this effort. And right now, I've heard we're seriously under count. We have a bunch of kids in the academy, but you know, they take a couple of years before they're even ready, and we're going to have retirements before that. And it's just for that reason, more or less, I think with this public safety issue that I can't support this, even though I know it's going to happen. I'm not going to move the Titanic here. I just can't support it. And, you know, I'd like to see what other cities do if they're ahead of the curve on us and learn from those experiences and apply them to our own down the road. But right now, I am just not there. I just, if I can analogize, I feel like in terms of the lack of public safety officers, is that we're talking about building an indoor fire pit here, and we don't have enough smoke detectors in house. And that's just how I feel. And I'm not going to say anything else about it, but I do want to thank you for your hard work and thought about it. It's clear that you've really put a lot of time in this, and I'm sure we're going to put a lot more time into it down the road. Thanks.
Obviously, I appreciate your comments. I know we spoke a couple days ago, and you know, I hope that as we learn and hopefully move forward on this and progress, that you know we all work collaboratively to make this as good a policy as possible.
And just speaking for myself as chair, having worked on this with Josh for like the last, almost 10 months on this, this is a lot of money for the city through this mechanism, and not to take advantage of it and organize it for the city, I think would be a dereliction of my duty as a council person, not to collect these sums and make sure that they get dispersed in the city in the most amenable and fair and equitable way possible. So I do support moving this forward. Nora, going back to you, are you going to suggest language that you'd like to amend tonight? You know, we've got a couple of other little changes, but are you going to want to make your change tonight and have it voted on, or are you going to wait till till September when we have the public hearing? What's your preference?
Really, as a question, you know, a little bit, what's your preference, Chair? What would be easiest to do?
I think it'd probably be easier to do now because it's something that people might want to comment on publicly. It speaks to the equity piece of the ordinance.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly.
Okay, great. Well, then certainly, you know, we can, I can propose language that would, you know, that we would want to put that in there.
I feel like it should go under 1.6, right? Where
Yes.
enforcement,
110, wouldn't it?
or you want to go?
110.
I thought 161. Okay, 110 is.
Well, 110 is the cannabis account. You're right.
Yeah, so I was thinking more the enforcement, but if we wanted to just have reporting, call it cannabis account and other reporting.
Yeah, well, it could go either way. I had thought about putting it with the enforcement, since really the reporting would be coming from presumably public safety as opposed to finance or community services. I guess community services would be doing the cannabis account reporting, but
It would probably
really
be
we
coming
could go
from the
either way.
police department, right? It's,
I would think,
I would
I would think
think,
1.6 is the proper place for this.
Yeah, I would think so.
I would make this 1.6D. Or 4, sorry.
it could be 4 or it could be
Oh, I
B.
would,
Just,
I would,
may-
I would think it, I would
Or
think it,
B.
B, or B.
I think,
yeah, I would do 1.6B.
Brian,
So
are you, Brian, Candela, you're taking notes to draft this?
Yeah, I think, I think that the language, I'm assuming you want annually. Is that what you want, Nora?
Yep, annually, yep.
All right, I'll put together, I'll try to work on some language right now. I'm assuming it's gonna be the chief of police or the designee.
Yep.
Let's see, so we got the chief of police or their designee shall on an annual basis or otherwise requested by the common council, prepare and deliver a report to the common council concerning the
Well, the number of
Yeah.
violations.
number of violations issued,
We want demographics.
number of violations issued,
Pursuant to this chapter.
yeah, thank you, pursuant to this chapter. This report shall include information concerning the, what do you want, geography?
Geography and demographics, I would think would be the most
Geography and
important.
demographics.
Do we need
of-
to include the words racial and gender demographics, or does demographics cover it?
I think it covers it.
Demographics of the violations issued
Nora,
pursuant
does
to this
repeat
chapter.
offenders interest you? Do you have, like, do you want to know if there's repeat offenders or repeat?
I would, yeah, I definitely think information on repeat offenders would be important. Because
Well,
I think
okay,
that
I'm
would
gonna
be,
stop for a second. So I think you want to report on the violators, but what do we do with the information about repeat offenders? I mean, what is the goal of that? I mean, that seems like a police thing. What do we do with it as a council?
well, so I think that the information about repeat offenders would potentially as a council, again, would be targeted at this question of, is there a place where there's a lack of a designated space? Right? I mean, because I think that's the equity, part of the equity piece of this is, are we having people being picked up in the same area, or are we having the same people being picked up? And in both of them would be a signal that potentially they're lacking a safe designated space that's convenient enough that they're using it. I don't know.
I
go
thought
with
you were
that.
worried about repeat fines and what the economic burden on some of these repeat offenders might look like.
Right, and that would be right. That would be the other reason to want to know about repeat offenders is if we are causing an undue burden on particular individuals, or if the repeat offenders are then being subjected to subsequent consequences because of their repeat offenses, right? If they're, if warrants are issued because their fines have exceeded a certain level or something like that, I think that would be information we'd want to know.
Tom, what are you worried about with that?
Well, I'm going back, what do we do? I mean, look, let's get the information, but we've already delegated to the mayor to pick the spots, right? So are we going to use this information to go to him, hey, look, we got a lot of spots here, you ought to do here. Power of persuasion is fine, but doesn't give us any particular authority to do anything about it. And that's fine to get the information, that's good, but I just don't want to fool anybody thinking that automatically changes what we're doing.
Well, so I'd say two things there. One is we can always change the ordinance. So if we are perceiving a problem and the mayor is failing to address the problem, then we can always change the ordinance to designate spots or to give the council authority to designate spots. I mean, there's that would be the whole point, right? Is if we feel like the mayor's discretion is not working, then we would need as a council to change the ordinance. And then I think the second issue is also that by creating this report, even if the mayor is then the one who's using the information, we've requested the report and it would presumably go to the mayor as well as us. And that ensures that even if the mayor doesn't request the report his or herself, the report is nonetheless generated.
Yeah,
But
like
what
I
if
said,
we-
I'm
what
not
if we
against
added-
it.
What if we
I'm
added
just-
language? This report shall include but not be limited to information concerning the geography and demographics of the violations issued pursuant to this chapter. I mean, the common council could then ask the chief of police for additional information, not not just geography and demographics, but any information that you would want, but geography and demographics would be, two things that definitely is the
Or you
information
can
that you're
say,
seeking.
and such other information requested by the council or something like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
So-
I think that's good.
Okay, so we'll make that change. David, do you have some other thoughts?
Well, just that I think that it should also say, however the language is to say delivered to the council, should be delivered to the mayor and the council. Since
Yeah,
the mayor is
yeah.
part of this decision-making process for the space.
I support that.
No, let me read back what I have right now. The chief of police or their designee shall, on an annual basis or otherwise as requested by the common council, prepare and deliver a written report to the common council and the mayor concerning the number of violations issued pursuant to this chapter. This report shall include information concerning the geography and demographics of the violations issued pursuant. This report shall include the information concerning the geography and demographics of the violations issued and such other information as requested by the
requested.
common council
Or the mayor?
or the mayor.
Do you want to say shall include, but not be limited to, so that we could expand it to other, or the
Oh.
chief of police, the police department may have other, they may come up with other metrics that they want to share as well. So
All right, I have a decent draft of what I think everyone's getting at here. I can read it back one more time, or
Please do.
Okay. Chief of police or the designee shall, on an annual basis or as otherwise requested by the common council. Do you want or the mayor?
Yeah,
Or the mayor, prepare and deliver a report to the common council and
Written
the
report,
mayor.
right, Brian?
What's
Written
that?
report, written report.
A written report to the common council and the mayor concerning the number of violations issued pursuant to this chapter. This written report shall include but not be limited to information concerning the geography and demographics of the violations issued and such other information as requested by the common council or the mayor.
okay, so let me just double check that we've got all of the changes that we want to make, that then we can vote to take this to public hearing at our next meeting. So I think that under 1.5C, we're going to change the last sentence to read as follows. The designated place or places shall contain visible multilingual signage that clearly delineates, and that goes on. And then the very last sentence, we're going to say, such place or places may be redesignated from time to time at the mayor's discretion, period. So those are the
Yes.
changes I have there. And then the other change I have is the addition of what just Brian just read as 1-6B. Are there other changes that I have missed that we want to make in this before we take the vote? And Dominique, I'll get to you in 1 minute if we just finish this thought, because it may fall out of my head. Are there
I
other?
don't see any.
Okay. All right. So Dominique, do you have other changes you would like to propose before we send it to the vote?
It's not a change, just more of a reclarification maybe. So we're giving the mayor the discretion to decide where people can, and we've been using the term smoke, but consume means anything, right? That's what we're talking about. Okay. So any cannabis product at all consuming. Okay. How do we feel? I mean, do we need to say to the mayor in this ordinance, back to Nora's point, you cannot be within 1,000 feet of a sensitive place, this cannot be, or are we okay giving that discretion to the mayor? And then if we don't, again, this gets back to, if we're not happy with how that's happening, we revise the ordinance to solve that problem, should it emerge.
Josh, it looks like you'd like to answer that.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the latter. The reason being, again, by affording the mayor, as the designated person who gets to designate this, little inception there, we want to give the flexibility. That's the purpose of this provision. I would agree that if for some reason this mayor or a mayor down the road designates it in a place that the council thinks is in a sensitive spot or something that is incorrect, the council has every right to amend the ordinance and put in those amendments. I would also note that hopefully by that point, and I assume that by that point, there would be corresponding zoning regulations where there would be applicable language that you could just put into an ordinance. So I think the smartest course of action at this point in time is to do the latter of what you just said.
I agree. And plus you'd also go down the path of what are you going to include?
Yep.
You know, schools, then hospitals and drugs, rehab centers and so forth and so on. So
Well, it would be a list. That's.
it would be a list, and I think we're better off just leaving it. I mean, let's face facts. Political reality is the mayor is not going to do, any mayor, no mayor is going to put it next to a school.
Well, that's my
No.
concern. I mean, full disclosure, like and Josh knows this, I worked on this back in my earlier life in California that became the research that we're basing this on for tobacco and alcohol. So I have a soft spot for making sure this doesn't go near a school because I believe in that wholeheartedly. And I can't imagine, to your point, Tom, that would be happening, but that we have the power to say, no, if it does happen is what I wanted full disclosure to kind of have us talk about right there.
Yeah, we can absolutely amend the ordinance if we think that the mayor's misbehaved.
Yeah, that's cool. I appreciate that clarification.
Okay, so I would like to entertain a motion to vote to take this cannabis ordinance. Josh, would make the motion, Josh, you've done all the work.
I would like to move that the ordinance titled Regulation of Cannabis be moved to public hearing
They say in September.
in September 2022.
All in favor? Remember, we're just moving it for public hearing for anybody who needs clarification. We're not voting in favor of the ordinance at this time.
I'm gonna say no,
September,
thank you.
Just
But
for the
we're
record,
We're
it's,
still taking yeses right now. So
Sorry.
I don't have a vote from Nora yet. Nora, are you voting in favor of taking it to public hearing? Missing part of Nora's card.
Are you having trouble hearing me?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. So we have 6 yays. And is there anybody who would like to vote against taking it to public hearing in September?
No, thanks.
1 vote. Okay, so 6.
Lisa, it's September 20th of 2022, just for the record.
So our next meeting will be September 2022, and we will take this cannabis ordinance on Josh's motion to public hearing at that time. All right, is there any new business? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Somebody raise their hand. Josh, you got it. All right, motion to adjourn has been approved, everybody? Yes, okay. All in favor of that. Great.
Thanks,
All right, we're
everyone. Good
done.
night.
Thank you.
Good night,
Good,
everybody. Be safe.
Take care.